Before we can explore the life of Majorian and his epic deeds, I would first like to explore another important emperor whom I deem together with Majorian the last good emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Procopius Anthemius. He is much less known than Majorian, and even Majorian is much less known than he would deserve. So therefore we must also take a look at the deeds of Anthemius, this quite unrightfully obscure Western Roman emperor who was sent by the East in the darkest hour to restore the glory of Rome. It was a dark time for the Imperium. Our hero emperor Julius Valerius Maiorianus, commonly known as Majorian, had been brutally betrayed by the evil barbarian Magister Militum Ricimer in one of the most vile deeds known to humanity in AD 461. After having almost managed to restore the Western Roman Empire to its former glory, Majorian was betrayed by traitors who burned down his fleet of ships that was harbored at Portus Ilicitanus at Carthago Nova, and would have possibly enabled to reconquer Africa, but it was not to be. On his way back to Italy, the noble emperor was then backstabbed in a second, even more brutal betrayal by his supposed old friend Ricimer, who then showed his true colors. And when Majorian died, so died the last hope of the Western Roman Empire of being restored. Or did it? Well, it is true that everything that Majorian had planned for and his conquests were quickly undone in the years following his death. His successor, the Emperor Libius Severus, was effectively just a puppet emperor of Ricimer, not wielding any real power. In the 4 years of Libius Severus's rule, everything that Majorian had accomplished was undone. His reforms were ignored, the Visigoths had recaptured Hispania again, and the situation looked almost as bad as before Majorian's epic conquests. But the relationship of Ricimer with the Eastern Roman Emperor of that time, Leo I, was bad because Leo I did not accept Severus as rightful Western Roman Emperor. It is therefore thought that Ricimer decided to get rid of Severus in order to make place for an emperor that would be accepted by the East. However, it must be noted that this is not 100% proven. I am quite open about not liking Ricimer. After all, he killed possibly one of the best emperors of all time and did many other vile deeds, but it can't be proven that he had Severus killed. Sidonius Apollinaris, for example, wrote that Libius Severus died a natural death, but then again Cassiodorus wrote that Ricimer had Severus poisoned. But what we do know is that after Severus's death, Leo I would send someone to the west who would be the very last hope for restoration of the Western Roman Empire. A man called Procopius Anthemius, who was a descendant of another Procopius, who was none other than the cousin of the legendary emperor Julian himself, a usurper against the inept emperor Valens. If only Procopius had achieved in usurping Valens, history might have gone entirely differently. So therefore, we would see a distant relative of Julian himself try to restore the glory of Rome the same way that Julian himself had tried some 100 years earlier. And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting our work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. As you can imagine, YouTube is not really generous to such a niche topic about the late Roman Empire. So in order to be long-term sustainable, I really need your financial support via Patreon or YouTube membership, as sorry as I am to say this. But luckily we have already amazing people who generously support us, and I really can't thank you enough for supporting our work. Seriously, my wife and me thank you from the bottom of our hearts, every one of you who supports this channel. And we even have a new high-ranking supporter, namely Sobek, Lord of the Four Corners. who is supporting this channel as Kaisar. Thank you so much for your generous support, Sobek. Majorian would thank you for supporting a channel bearing his name. Gratias ago tibi, amici. It was thus Anno Domini 467 that the Eastern Roman court of Leo I sent Procopius Anthemius to the west, and he would arrive at Rome, the eternal city itself, in that same year. Contrary to many emperors before him, he would not choose to reside at Ravenna or at Mediolanum, but he took up residence at Rome. In fact, unknown to many, especially in the later years of the Western Roman Empire, Rome had managed to re-emerge more often than not as the imperial capital, something about which I talked in this video here. Anthemius restored the old imperial coin mint and took up residence in the palace complex of the old emperors on the Palatine Hill, which was still in working order and had been repaired from the damage it suffered in the two sacks of Rome of 410 and 455. Yet still, Rome, of course, after these two sacks, was not as splendorous anymore as it had been before. I talked about the state of Rome during that time in this video here. Anthemius had several problems to deal with. His biggest one was the same one that Majorian had faced, namely the Vandals still occupying Africa, the breadbasket of the Western Empire, and the richest province, which was consequently an extremely important tax base. The survival of the Western Empire depended on reconquering Africa. The other problem were the resurging Visigoths, who had expanded again after Majorian had defeated them decisively and reduced them to foederati status. Luckily though, as compared to Severus, Anthemius had very good relations with the East. In fact, Anthemius is the last Western emperor to have been recorded in Eastern law. It is also sometimes believed that he was a secret pagan. There are some indicators for this, although it cannot be entirely proven. For one, he had a contorniate minted, bearing a reference to Hercules. Then he surrounded himself with pagans. His general, the comes Marcellinus, was a pagan. And the urban prefect of Rome, the praefectus urbi, Messius Phoebus Severus, also a good friend of Anthemius, was also a pagan. And then Anthemius had studied at the Neoplatonic school in Alexandria under Proclus, and Marcellinus and Messius Phoebus Severus were colleagues of him who had also studied there, which is where he probably got to know them. And then, according to Damascius, one of the last Neoplatonists, a pagan himself, Anthemius and his friend Messius Phoebus Severus even planned a pagan revival at Rome. Apparently, they were preparing to reopen the old temples that had been forced shut by Theodosius some 72 years earlier. First and foremost, they were apparently planning to restore the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus and repair the damage it had suffered in the Vandal sack. If these things are true or not, we will never know for certain, but it is absolutely fascinating nonetheless that paganism was apparently still strong even as late as that time, something which we discussed in this video here. But before he could attempt to restore the old pagan rites at Rome, if true, he needed to increase his power, and reconquering Africa would do exactly that. Already in 467, Anthemius organized an expedition led by Marcellinus against the Vandals, but due to bad weather, the Roman fleet had to abort the operation. In 468, Anthemius would organize the next try, but this time together with the East, and the Eastern Roman Empire, having had the higher tax revenue, assembled a massive fleet. The joint Eastern and Western fleet was one of the largest ever assembled in antiquity. 1,100 ships sailed to Africa in 468. Gaiseric was powerless against such a force and asked for peace. The inept Eastern Roman naval commander Basiliscus was in charge of the fleet, while Marcellinus would attack from Sicily with another fleet. Gaiseric demanded time to prepare the surrender and to accept the terms of the Romans. Overconfident, Basiliscus anchored the fleet at Cape Bon, but of course Gaiseric, being the cunning bastard that he was just playing for time. He had a fleet of explosive ships prepared, which he unleashed onto the Roman fleet as soon as the wind had turned, destroying and sinking over half of the Roman fleet. Thus, this D-Day of antiquity ended in disaster for the Romans by the folly of an incompetent Eastern Roman naval commander. This bankrupted the Eastern Empire, which was now completely unable to help the West from that time onwards. And this severely weakened Anthemius, but made Ricimer stronger. Anthemius needed a victory, but after the disaster against the Vandals, the treasury was almost empty. He recruited the Britons under their king Riotamus to fight against the Visigoths and their king Euric. Riotamus is a possible candidate of being the legendary King Arthur. We shall talk about this in another video. But Riotamus was defeated and fled to the Burgundians to the city of Avalon, a name which is also famous from the Arthur legend. So then Anthemius recruited an army with the little funds he had left and sent his son Anthemiolus together with some other generals, commanding this army to attack Euric and his Visigoths. But this plan also failed, and they were all killed by the Visigoths at Arelate. This was another brutal blow to Anthemius. Not only did he lose his son, but another army was destroyed, and the hope of reconquering Hispania was now lost. In 470, Anthemius had Romanus executed, a friend of Ricimer, on grounds of treason. Even though Ricimer was married to Anthemius' daughter Alypia, this didn't prevent an open break between the two. It led to civil war, which was completely standard practice in the late Roman Empire, and Ricimer besieged Rome in 472. I talked extensively about this quite unknown sack in this video here. Anthemius did unfortunately lose, his forces were defeated, Rome was ravaged and sacked by Ricimer's barbarians, and Anthemius sought refuge in a church in Rome, but was discovered by Gundobad, a relative of Ricimer, and killed. Thus perished Rome's last hope for restoration, again initiated by Ricimer. With Anthemius' death, so was the death of Rome a done deal, and only 4 years later would dissolve what was left of the Western Roman Empire. And if you are interested in how exactly Rome looked in the time of Anthemius, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in how Constantinople looked, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias amici imperii Romani, and bene vale.